A very good afternoon, dear listeners of class 10th English. So, children, today we are going to start with our second story of the book First Flight, right? So, the title is Nelson Mandela Long Walk to Freedom. So, that's written by former South African President Nelson Mandela himself, right? So, children, to begin with the reading, I would like to tell you certain things about the write up today, right? So, about the fiction, non fiction, all the genres of prose, two are the distinct ones. So, that first one is a biography, and the second is autobiography, right? So, biography is that write up that is based on the life events of a person that is written by somebody else. Suppose Mahatma Gandhi's life story, if that is narrated by somebody else, so it would be called a biography. Second one is autobiography, right? So, our present story, you may not call it a proper story, that is actually an autobiographical account, right? That means the things, the events which we would read in our chapter today are directly narrated by Nelson Mandela himself, right? So, the things, the events which are being talked about in this story are directly narrated by the writer himself, and the writer is, you may say, the protagonist of this chapter. The writer is the major character of this chapter, right? So, we won't actually call it a story, that is an autobiographical account of Nelson Mandela, right? So, I hope, children, you must have heard the name in your life before. Nelson Mandela was a great personality. He belonged to South Africa and he became the first black president of South Africa. First black. To become first is always considered the most difficult thing. To become first, it is always the most difficult task. Let me give you an example. Sometimes in a class, teacher generally asks us to respond or to give answers, or even some teachers ask the students to raise questions to whatever they have discussed in the class. Say all the students are feeling a hesitation at that time, and there would be one student who would stand up and ask questions about the text or whatever they have discussed, right? So becoming that first one to raise question is, the most difficult task, because everybody else is thinking that any kind of response may come from the teacher, any kind of response, any scolding may come from the teacher, any kind of negative remarks may come from the class itself, right? So being the first one is the most difficult task, right? So if first question gets successful, there is no negative response either from the class or from the teacher's side, then next students start raising their hands for asking questions or for the participation in class, right? So what I wanted to clear here is that becoming first is always very difficult. So, Nelson Mandela was the first black president of South Africa, right? So, that was a big historic occasion when he was sworn in as the president of that country, right? So, what was he basically? We would discuss his long walk to freedom. So, children, Long Walk to Freedom is a book, is a textual piece written by Nelson Mandela. But today, of course, we are not being prescribed the entire book. We would just take an extract. In our book First Flight, just a part of that book has been taken to form a lesson, right? So, it is about Nelson Mandela's journey, Nelson Mandela's walk towards freedom, right? So what is this chapter basically about? So before opening this point, I would like to tell you that as a major, the event, the historic occasion, the inauguration is being talked about in this story. Inauguration means it was the occasion when a new democratic government, like free from all types of bounds, was going to take over the reign of South Africa, and it was under the leadership of none else but the great Nelson Mandela, right? So for the establishment of such a type of government, Mandela had to do a lot of sacrifices. He had to do a lot of labor for that, and he spent near about 30 years, 30 years of his life in prison for this cause. So I hope you understand that sacrificing 30 years of someone's life, say almost the average life is 60, 65, 70, right? So sacrificing 30 years of one's life to win over some political cause, to win over some social cause, is a big sacrifice, right? So Nelson Mandela did that for his country. Means for the establishment of such type of government, Nelson Mandela had to undergo this long imprisonment. And what was the reason why he went to jail, why he went to prison and spent such a long period there? He would discuss that in brief, but the chapter actually details the achievement of Nelson Mandela and his inner feelings, that how he feels after that achievement, right? So the chapter throws light on how he had to undergo such difficult situations to seize the problem, the monster called apartheid policy in South Africa. Apartheid policy was there. Apartheid, Apartheid. I would repeat, Apartheid, apartheid policy of South Africa. So children, first of all you need to know what is the meaning of apartheid. I hope you know the context of colors, context of race. Some people have white skin, some while others have black skin. So as you can see clearly from the picture in the introductory page itself, that the person present in the picture, that is Nelson Mandela himself, right? So his complexion is dark. So it means he was wearing black skin. So that's why, like, I am again and again addressing him as the first black president of South Africa, right? So why? Because he greatly struggled for the freedom of his people, for the freedom, for providing the freedom to the people of his race, right? So what did he do actually, and what was apartheid, right? We would discuss first that the application of apartheid policy meant discrimination towards the black people at the hands of white ones, right? It means black people were not given proper freedom, black people were not treated properly in society, they didn't have that many rights as were enjoyed by white people, right? So they people yearned for their freedom, they people longed for their freedom, they wanted to achieve as much as freedom as that was enjoyed by the white people of that country. Like almost like a cold war. It was not actually cold at that time. People were suffering a lot and openly, like, they were tortured, they were not able to get their own basic rights, right? So this was apartheid. It means discrimination was done to black people, and who did that discrimination? The people having white skin, right? The white, so called white people did that discrimination, right? So this was actually a fight for freedom, a fight for universal equality, like irrespective of any caste, color, creed or religion, right? So children, see, in this paragraph, like again in the second introduction, I would say, in continuation to that introduction, right, the picture shows two people here. First is Nelson Mandela himself and second is Mahatma Gandhi. Why Mahatma Gandhi? Children, I am mentioning Gandhi because these two were in close association in this fight for freedom, in this fight for equality. Right? Mahatma Gandhi was there in the 20th century and Nelson Mandela too was there. Right? So, like when Nelson Mandela, he was suffering, when he was at the peak of like that suffering. Next is, see, so like what they did, when Nelson Mandela, like he emerged, as it is written, he was born in 1918, 18th July 1918, and he became the first South African president, and that was selected in a fully representative democratic election. Fully representative democratic election. So see, children, what was his aim? And like here he has established himself as a great leader. So how he started? He struggled against the racial discrimination between the whites and the blacks, right? So in this essay, he speaks about a historic occasion when he was sworn in as the president of South Africa, right? So the historic day was 10th May 1994. He was born in July 1918, but the historic day when he was called to swear as the president of South Africa, the day was a historic one. The date was 10th May 1994, right? So he calls that occasion the inauguration. So why inauguration? So as it was the inauguration of the first democratic non-racial government in South Africa. First democratic non-racial government in South Africa, right? And a big gathering of international leaders was there in Pretoria. That was the place in Pretoria to mark the end of that so-called white supremacy. So-called white supremacy. Supremacy means that feeling of being supreme which was opted by the white people in South Africa and that was continuously oppressing the black ones since ages. Right? So Mandela was the one who raised his voice against that discrimination and inequality, and he had many followers. He too followed many people, and together they brought this morning for the South African black people. Right? So children, don't misunderstand the statement like the white people were deprived of anything. No. When Mandela took oath as the president of South Africa, he provided equal rights to one and all. Be it black person, be a white one, like be anybody at all, equal rights were provided to the people of South Africa, right? So this photograph tells us that as he was trained as an attorney, right? So he helped the formation of youth league, means a gathering of a collection of a group of young people, and that league was of the African National Congress, as we have always been hearing of Indian National Congress, right? INC. So there it is, African National Congress, and like he was trained as an attorney. And in which year it happened? It happened in the year 1944, right? So in 1961, he abandoned means he left that peaceful protest that the black people were doing for the inequality and injustice being done to them, and he became the head of African National Congress new military wing. He became the head of that wing. See, as you can see him in the picture, this is the person, right? So he became the head of ANC's new military wing, right? I hope that's clear. So next, children, see how he had to struggle and why he had to struggle so long. See, in the year 1964, because as we saw in 1961, he abandoned the peaceful mode of fight. So in the year 1964, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, right? So he came to symbolize black political aspirations and was named head of ANC after he was released from the prison in the year 1990. So about 27 years of his age he had spent in prison, and see the transformation of time, see the determination of Mandela. Like, after spending such a long span of time in prison, he emerged as the first black president of South Africa, right? So how it all happened, and see in the next picture, two people are shown there. It means the swearing in ceremony, it took place in a big sandstone amphitheater in Pretoria. It was a grand place, and Mandela was accompanied by his daughter Zenani, 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 right? So during that ceremony, Mr. De Klerk was sworn in as deputy. His name is also written FW De Klerk, right? So De Klerk was sworn in as second deputy president, and followed by Mr. Thabo Mbeki, who was sworn in as the first deputy president. It means three people were there to take an oath. First was Nelson Mandela himself as the president of South Africa. Second was Mr. De Klerk, as shown in this picture. He was sworn in as the second deputy president, followed by whom? Mr. Thabo Mbeki, who was sworn as in the first deputy president of South Africa, right? So that was a moment, that was a historical moment when Nelson Mandela took oath as the president of South Africa. He pledged to obey and uphold the constitution, and he dedicated himself wholeheartedly to the well-being of his people, to the welfare of his people. Of his people doesn't only mean of black people. He emerged as a liberal president who took an oath to take equal care of whites as well as black people, right? So I hope that's clear till now. So in his public address, when Nelson Mandela was to take an oath for the president of India, of South Africa, right? So in his that oath, he spoke of the newborn liberty. People often talk of newborn baby. Here Mandela talked of a newborn liberty. It means the freedom that was newly born for the black people of South Africa, right? So in his public address, he called it a newborn liberty. So he thanked all the international guests gathered there to be with his countrymen in that common victory for justice, peace and human dignity. Right? So he pledged himself to liberate his people from poverty, suffering and all kinds of discrimination. Right? So he took that oath that he would liberate all his people. He would liberate the entire humanity, entire human race of South Africa, right, from poverty, suffering and discrimination. So it was promised by him on stage in a public address. In a public address means openly amongst the public of South Africa, right? So after the ANC victory in April 1994 elections, he worked to ease the racial tensions, quote foreign investments and providing services to the victims of apartheid. Apartheid, the people who suffered in their life due to the discrimination of blacks at the hands of white people, right? After that swearing in ceremony, a spectacular show by jets, defense, and police force was presented. Right? So, South African jets and helicopters, in the welcome of the new president. So, jets and helicopters flew over the union buildings. So, it was actually a symbol of the military's loyalty to the new democracy, right? Military's loyalty to democracy. So, in the end of that show, a V-shaped impulse jets left with a smoke of trail of the black, red, green, blue, right? So, colors of the flag of South Africa, right? So, of that colors and gold of new South African flag, right? So that then the highest military generals saluted Nelson Mandela. Highest military generals, the people who used to spit over him, the people who used to embarrass him, humiliate him, all those people were full of respect for Mandela at that time. So a very surprising thing. So two national anthems were played, two distinct national anthems. The white sang Nkosi Sikelel e Afriki and the black sang Die Stem, right? So these formed the national anthems of the republic. It means as all of you know that we have one national anthem, right? As for India, we have one national anthem. So as for South Africa, black people are there and white people are there. There are still two categories. So both the national anthems were sung on that oath-taking ceremony of Nelson Mandela. It means that symbolizes that how much he loved those people, how equally he wanted to put both the parties, how he was like not at all inclined towards any kind of discrimination, neither towards black nor towards white people, right? So next, what happens? Mandela doesn't forget to recall history on this occasion. Like he remembers how a system of racial domination was created against the black people, and that too in their own land, in their own country. Like it was the most inhumane system built by the white people, he said. Right? The black people were even denied the basic rights, their basic freedom. The policy of apartheid that created a very deep and long lasting wound in the country and his people. So, however, he feels very happy, very glad that such a cruel system of the policy of apartheid has finally come to an end, and he promises that in the new system recognition would be given to the rights and freedoms of all the people regardless of the color of their skin. Means even if they are black or they are white, they would be given equal kind of freedom. The respect would be equal respect would be given to both the parties, right? So at this occasion, Nelson Mandela, like I have pasted some of the pictures here so that you can recognize the great personalities. Like these are some prominent names in the struggle against apartheid. As we talk of Mahatma Gandhi, like Gandhi was not alone in the freedom struggle of India. Several people were there to accompany Mahatma Gandhi. So see, these were the major ones. Of course, several others were there to help Nelson Mandela out, right? So these were the major ones, prominent names who struggled hard against the policy of apartheid, right? Like further, see, he remembers all those people. We have seen many callous people who never give importance to others, right? So, but there are people, and of course Nelson Mandela is one of them, who do recognize the works of others, who do appreciate others, who have that big heart of giving appreciation to others. Mandela remembers the freedom fighters who sacrificed their lives against oppression, discrimination, inequality. It means he pays a tribute to great leaders, right? So they were Oliver Tambo, Walter Cicero, Chief Luthuli, Yusuf Dadu, Bram Fisher, Robert Suke, etc. Right? Like such people of uncommon courage. He called them people of rare courage and wisdom, and he called them the greatest wealth of his country. Like he is not only celebrating his victory, he is saying that all these people who lost their lives while fighting for the freedom struggle, right? So these all are the people of rare courage and wisdom, right? Rare courage and wisdom. They are very great personalities, and they are actually the greatest wealth of South Africa. Here he talks of a very, very beautiful statement. He says that these leaders, the ones who are shown in the picture here, these leaders taught Mandela, that courage was not the absence of fear. Means the one who says that I am not afraid is not courageous, but it's the triumph over it. It means courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. It means that the one who is victorious has taken over the fear. It means he has crossed that fear. He is not at all like saying that absence of fear. He is talking of overcoming that fear. Next is, see, the brave man, he says, is not the one who doesn't fear, but the one who conquers it, but the one who wins over it, right? He used to say that like no one is born hating others because of color or religion, creed, caste, etc. Like if we can learn to hate, we can learn to love also. Love comes naturally to human heart, and this is what we should do. We should learn to love others, right? So in that particular occasion, there is another very important thing that he talks of. He talks of twin obligations. So children, listen to it very, very carefully, and this is actually a question that is often repeated in the board examination, house examination, as well as board examinations. So he talks of twin obligations. Twin means double, right? At one time, two at a time. So he talks of twin obligations. It means he says that every person has two obligations in his life. Two obligations means first obligation towards his family, his parents, his wife and children, towards the entire family including parents, wife, children, right? And the second obligation he has towards the people of his country, his community, right? So he says that both the obligations are must for a man. It means if somebody is to do some righteous thing, if somebody is to follow a right path, he says that each one of us should fulfill these two obligations. Like he regrets that no one in South Africa could fulfill these obligations during the era of oppression, discrimination and inequality. He regrets that. He is, full of sorrow here when he says that no person in South Africa could fulfill these twin obligations, because either there were people who were, committed to their family, or there were people who lost their lives in the freedom struggle of South Africa. So he didn't know a person who could fulfill these two obligations, who could fulfill double obligations, right? Next he says that in a civil and humane society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclinations and abilities, as I told you. Some were devoted too much towards their country, others were fulfilling the needs of their family. So but he says that in a country like South Africa, so it was almost impossible for a man of my birth and color to fulfill both of these, as I already elaborated, right? So next he says that, see, he says that a man of color means a man of dark complexion, a man of black complexion. If they tried to live a proper life of a human being, they were punished and isolated like this. They were punished, and punished by whom? They were punished by the white people of the time. Second, in the next picture, see, in that country, a man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people was inevitably ripped from his family. Ripped means they were separated from their families and his home, and was forced to live a life apart. That was apartheid. Life apart, a twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. So they were given a harsh life, a life which was considered the life of a rebellion, the life of a person who is not loyal to his country. So children, next he says that, although he says that he was born free, but as he grew up, he realized that his freedom was just an illusion. He finds that his freedom was just an illusion. It was just a false thing, right? Soon he found that the others were also not free. See, he says that I was not born with a hunger to be free. I was born free in every way that I could know. Seriously, he begins to feel that other people are also suffering like him. Like he is not the only one who is suffering, right? So as a result of this realization, he joined ANC, that is African National Congress, because he wanted that his people should also be free. Black people should also be free. First he says that, in the beginning, he says that he chose to place his people, right? He chose to place his own people, his family, above his country. But in attempting to serve his people, while attempting means in the process of serving the black people, process of serving the people of South Africa, he realized that he was prevented from fulfilling his obligations as a son, brother, husband, and a father to his children. So here he decides that he would give equal attention. Equal attention, he would place them on equal states, at par. It means he would treat his country as well as his family equally. Means he would not give more importance to his family, less to his country, and vice versa. So that was a big statement from the president of that country. As blacks were denied freedom, Mandela says that, see the scenery, he wanted to be free to run in the fields near his mother's hut, free to swim in the clear stream that ran through his village, free to roast mealies under the stars and ride the broad backs of slow moving bulls. Like whatever he wanted to enjoy, whatever joys he wanted to take out of that rural background, right? So he wanted to enjoy each and everything. So next he says that, see, as long as he obeyed his father and abided by the customs of his tribe, he was not troubled by the laws of man or God, right? So he was always of the view that a winner is a dreamer who never gives up. A winner is that person who dreams of something and who doesn't stand still before the achievement, right? So he always says that to deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. Like if we are denying basic human rights to any people, to any person, That means that we are clearly challenging their humanity. Means that we don't have the right to do that. Still, the people are doing it in various corners of the world. Right? So, slowly, when he began to learn that his boyhood freedom was an illusion, he discovered as a young man that his freedom had already been taken from him, and he began to hunger for it. He began to crave for the achievement of freedom here. Right? So, next, it is shown that as a student, he wanted freedom for which things? For general things which for which all the students, almost all the students of the day crave for. See, he says he wanted freedom only for himself. The transitory freedoms. Transitory means temporary. The temporary freedoms of being able to stay, the people often want that they should be given freedom to stay outside throughout the night, that there should be no objection, right? So there should be no instructions, nobody to rule them at all, right? So he wanted to read the books whichever pleased him. He wanted to go wherever he wants, means he wanted to go anywhere. It was at a bit later stage, like when as a young man in Johannesburg, he yearned for the basic and that compulsory honorable freedoms of achieving his potential, his energy, the channelizing of his energy, of earning his own keep, right? Of marrying, of having a family, having children, the freedom which was not to be obstructed in a lawful life. The basic manners, the basic things he wanted to achieve was freedom in his thought and expression. As it is shown in the picture which what I discussed, that slowly he notices that he was not the only one who was bound and was not free. There were many like him, as he says, but my brothers and sisters were not free. Means there were many blacks, there were many people in South Africa at that time who were not free, who were denied their basic rights. So that was then he joined African National Congress, and that is when the hunger for his own freedom became greater hunger for the freedom of his people. Here he rises above the self. He rises above individuality. He talks of the rights of the people of his country. Not only his own rights, but for the rights of people of his country. So it was that extreme desire, his wish for the freedom of his people to live their lives with respect, self-respect and dignity, that decorated his life. Actually, that made him happy. As seen in the displayed in the poster, stop apartheid now. It means throw away the policy of apartheid now. Right? So that transformed a frightened young man, that is Mandela himself, into a bold personality. Like that drove a law-abiding attorney to become a criminal, and that turned a family-loving husband into a man without home. A man who had to spend 27 precious years of his life in prison. Right? That forced a life-loving man to live like a monk. Right? So next he says that freedom is invisible. Means the chains on any one of my people were the chains on all of them. The chains on all of my people were the chains on me. It means he adopted his country like a father. He used to treat his countrymen like his own children. See, as he says that, for to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. It means he says that everybody's freedom is important. He promises that each one of his people would get an environment where he would fulfill the twin obligations. Right? So he pledges to provide freedom to his people to live with dignity and self-respect and without any fear, of course. So next, he says that I knew that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. As people often retaliate. People often retaliate. It means they often take revenge. So here Nelson Mandela could have taken revenge from the white people, though from those people who have been oppressing the black people, who have been oppressing his people, right? But here, what was the unique thing about Mandela? See, a beautiful statement by Mandela. He says that I knew that the oppressor must be liberated. It means the white people should be given liberty. The white people should be free just as surely as the oppressed. It means as they denied the basic rights, the basic human rights to black ones, so he would not do any harm to those white ones. It means he would treat them equally, right? See, what was his ideology? What was his thinking? I truly love such lines he has written. See, a man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. Prejudice and narrow-mindedness. He says that man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. What he used to talk about? He always used to say that if we take away somebody's freedom, it's not that we are happy at that time. You can take the example of general life. If we stop talking to anyone, so our own mind remains, unhappy and sad at times. Our own mind remains disturbed due to that conflict with that person. On the other hand, if we go for resolution, if we go for reconciliation over petty things, so that would bring a peace of mind to one and all, to us as well, to the opposite, to the person opposite to us as well, right? It means to both the parties. So here he says that if we take away somebody's freedom, if we give pain to somebody, right? If we give pain to somebody, we are the ones who feel more painful, right? We ourselves are locked behind the bars of narrow-mindedness and feeling of hatred. Right? So what he says that I am not truly free if I am taking away someone else's freedom. It means that he could have taken back the freedom of white people, because when the president himself is a black one, the president himself belongs to the black race, he could have snatched the freedom of liberty of white ones. But he says that my mind is free. He says that I am free, so I will not take away anyone else's freedom. Just as surely as I am not free when my freedom is taken from me. It means whatever he along with his people have suffered, he would not let anyone, even if they are black or they are white, he would not let anyone suffer that kind of hatred. He has written a very, very beautiful thing. See the poster. He says, no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background, his religion. People must learn to hate. If they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. Like if somebody learns to hate, they can surely be given the lesson of loving, right? For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. It means love comes more naturally to the human heart as compared to hatred. Right? A very, very nice statement. Means the oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. It means both the parties suffer. If one party is oppressing the other, it doesn't mean that the superior one is happy. No, both the parties are unhappy because they are equally robbed of their humanity. Right? So he detested racialism because he regarded it as a barbaric thing. He regarded it as an uncivilized thing, whether it comes from a black man or from a white one. Right? So next, at last, he concludes that he himself was subjected to inhuman atrocities as he was black. right? So all in all, in the chapter, in a nutshell, I would say that the chapter mainly highlights the theme of equality and freedom for all the people, whether they are black or they are white. So equal rights be given to all of them. So I hope you have liked the lesson. Stay connected, stay at home. Thank you.